Everybody wants to be a part of the culture.
Until it's time to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
So we're having the uncomfortable conversations needed to spark the change.
Right here, right now.
We're your hosts, Kai Devereaux Lawson.
And I'm Simeon Coker.
And we say all the things you wouldn't.
Welcome back to the Mixed Company Podcast.
Recording in progress. I need to figure out how to get rid of this background, but while I do that, I'll open it up for another episode of Mixed Company Podcast. It's been a lot. Simeon, it's been a lot. It's been a lot this last month.
Yeah, the world's on fire, and but we've been doing dope shit, so that's cool.
Ironically enough, since the last time we spoke, the world literally, specifically the East Coast of North America, has been on fire. So while we took a month off from the podcast, we didn't take a month off from work. A lot has happened. Simeon, good to see you're alive and breathing, bro.
Yes, I mean, it is. I do what I can, but we've been.
He's breathing through a K95 mask in New York, though.
Okay, that's how we survive it. We are officially masked on. Shout out to Future. If you live in the Northeast, in particular in New York, we are masked on. Simeon, you brought a guest with us, so it looks like this is the running theme for this year. We've got all the guests, all the homies are coming to kick it with us. Why don't you introduce who we've got on the show with us today?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Rick from Branded Storytelling, and he was like, "You need to speak to this dude, Eternal Polk." And I was like, anybody with the name Eternal gets can get on the call. So we did get on the call, and I was like, "This dude is dope," and the work that he was doing was also just amazing. So I was like, we need to have him on the podcast. So I like to give people their flowers. So I'm going to read this dude's bio. Eternal Polk is a 2-time Emmy-nominated director, writer, and segment producer with over 20 years of directing short and long-form projects, including documentaries, music videos, branded content, and commercials. Eternal has served as a creative director, participating in ideation and copywriting of client commercial and branded content spots, while earning Telly, Webby, Shorty, and Uma awards. His work has been featured on HBO, Fox, ESPN, ABC, BET, VH1, and MTV. Gaining Ground, The Fight for Black Land is his first feature film as a director and executive producer. The man has done a lot, and also 2-time Emmy-nominated director, flex. Let's talk about it.
I'm about to say the whole bio is a flex. Welcome, Eternal Polk. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I did a couple of teams. Small teams.
Ting on ting. Just a couple of ting on ting. Yeah. We love to hear it, and we love to celebrate it. And we appreciate
Thank you for having me
with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, before we get into going in depth about you, your feature, and everything you got going on, I promised you were gonna have a moment to talk a little bit of shit. So let's open up the show with our favorite part where we get to talk our shit. It's dope shit and it's ain't shit, and a lot has happened in the last 6 weeks, I think, since we last recorded. Simeon, if you don't mind, I'll kick off.
Let's do it.
My dope shit. So for those of you that know, some of you that don't know, Simeon and I had the luxury, the privilege, the honor, and also the fuckery of going to the annual Cannes Lions Creativity Festival that happens in the south of France, the Côte d'Azur, where all of the highest of profiles of creatives, partiers, and entertainers head to the south of France to celebrate the work that we do on a day-to-day basis in the marketing, advertising, creative space. And so with that, whatever you're judging in your head is probably true. But there were some good spotlights. And so rather for me to go into detail about all of the shit I saw, I do want to give a shout out to a piece of work that I actually was taken aback with that I saw during the Cannes Lions Creativity Festival. And so for those of you that fuck with Disney, or have ever watched Disney or have believed yourself to be a Disney princess, shout out to me. I was a huge fan of Pocahontas, the movie, as a child until I became of appropriate reading age to learn deeper about our American history, to where I learned that that was complete folklore. But there was an amazing team of folks who actually worked to rewrite the script and the score for Pocahontas,
Oh,
as a submission for a Cannes Lion Award this year. And what they did, y'all, was absolutely amazing. They rewrote the script through the lens of Indigenous people. And so telling the story, sharing the narrative, the nuances in a way that they saw it. And I promise you, it was not a love story between John Smith and a grown Pocahontas. It was actually through the lens of a young, very young Indigenous girl. And I emphasize the words girl because this is, you know, think of your little cousin, think of your baby sister. This is what we're talking about. Where grown European men took advantage of her land, her people, her livelihood, and coveted it for themselves, in addition to, I'm sure, the raping and the pillaging that goes along with the early American story. And so I think it's so important for all of us to retell the stories that we can, to make sure that we put out there the side of the story that comes from the heart, that comes from the actual experience, not the mythology that we put into the world, even though sometimes that's cute too. And so it was nice to see that film, and I'll make sure I send the link to Simeon to post in the comments on social. But it was nice to see that kind of work be celebrated, and also to center the narrative of our Indigenous communities within the United States, and not just what we read in fourth grade history. Shout out to Mrs. Hurley. She did what she could with what she had.
Which
that was
brand?
dope.
What was that?
Which brand produced that?
That's how I know you wasn't listening, because I said I forgot.
Oh.
I said I forgot, and I'm gonna send you the link because I'm gonna look it up on the Cannes Lion site, because it was actually beautiful work. So I wrote the note for myself not to forget, but of course I forgot who worked on it. So we'll make sure we give credit where credit is due.
All good. I was half listening because I was getting my ain't shit together.
I already know.
So if you've been paying attention to the news over the last couple of weeks, then you know that the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admission, declaring that race can no longer be a factor in granting admission. So we are slowly turning into the Handmaid's Tale, because for the last couple of months or last year or so, this is like the next strike, I guess, in progressive things that we've worked on in this country over the last couple of years, from abortion and now this. And so I just think that this is like peak not shit or ain't shit things that are happening in this country. And if you're not paying attention, if you're not speaking about this, then you don't understand how this is going to trickle down into other facets of life when it comes to employment. This has to do with the stuff that we talk about on this podcast, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the Supreme Court, once again, is getting our ain't shit because they continue, well, the 6 justices continue to be not shit as far as I'm concerned.
And I mean, there's nothing else to say. I feel like they drop decisions like Jay-Z used to drop #1 summer hits. Every summer is a new album of changes. And all I can say is hide your kids, hide your wives, hide all of your rights, because
you Antoine right now.
Listen, you got to give credit where it's due. That's what I said. But you know, last year it was Roe versus Wade and a woman's, autonomy of her body and decision making in that area. This year it's affirmative action, which, yes, is specifically in the education realm. But when you look at that expands to profession, and that means that any other precedent that was set after education is going to be overturned eventually as well. And what's next? I mean, the 14th Amendment seems to keep coming up. Like, the more ridiculous it sounds, I think the deeper they lean into it. So, you know, we just got to enjoy whatever rights we have left and continue to fight the power, I guess.
And also in the professional realm, I don't have all of the details in front of me, but there was also that case with the I believe graphic designer who went to the Supreme Court to
in Colorado
to discriminate. So it's going to be trickling down over the next couple of of years. As long as the Supreme Court is in effect. Yeah, I feel like we're slowly entering the Handmaid's Tale.
You keep
And
saying slowly. The Handmaid's Tale was hot like 2 years ago. Like this feels quite rapid to me.
yeah, but until we have to like really leave this country to stay alive, then we're slowly entering into
Haven't you been working on your citizenship? Like I just feel like I don't know.
Oh, so he's trying to keep it. He's the character in the movie that knows the shit's about to happen, so he's quietly getting his stuff
Talking
together
about slowly. He only saying
while reassuring the public, it's 10 years off. He's like,
he's
What-
only saying slowly so he doesn't have to wait in line to get his paperwork. That's
there
it.
you go, there you go.
Listen, what did Jigga say? 2 passports, I ain't never going to jail.
I ain't never going to jail.
There you go, my guy.
Because they will put you in jail for being black if they could, I feel like at this point.
There's so many different ways to say being black. And so here we are. Eternal
Mhm.
Polk, what about you? What's happening in your ethos, your community, your network, anything really dope we should know about, or anybody we should be cussing out in our heads as we as we enter this week?
Okay, let's see. So we want to talk about ain't shit or dope shit. Which one do you want me to hear first?
If you got both, we're here for the double.
Oh, okay.
culture.
Okay. So let me just say, ain't shit the end of the George Floyd economy. These folks, I had to say it. I had to say it. You know where we at. The fact that
Whoa.
these folks really played that game with us, like all that money, all this effort, and all this other stuff, and you can count on one hand the people that's actually sticking to it. And us just, I don't know any black person that didn't know that this stuff was going to come to an end. I don't. but but here we are, and you just can look at all of these people who are just like waffling with them trying to be down. I won't even use the word woke because that's another ancient thing, the way they just took and like
That's another way to say black. That's another
Yeah,
way.
exactly.
Get arrested for being too woke.
Yes. The way these folks are just trying to you can see them trying to be down and just see how when they're just like, nah, we ain't gonna do that. And they just show their hand how they were really just about monetizing trauma. That's all they were doing. They were like monetizing trauma. And I feel bad for the people who actually believed it was going to happen, it was going to be sustained and was going to be changed, because I was like that old black man in a rocket chair on the porch, like, look at this. I know what's going on. So that's the ain't shit. The end of the George Floyd economy. I hate it.
Adding the George Floyd economy to the lexicon, because that is the best way to
I've
describe.
never heard that, but that was beautifully articulated. Like
Yes.
because that's what it was.
I have to give credit. I have to give credit to the first person that I heard say it that way. That's my man Dio Harewood, who is he's a VP over at Paramount, I believe. Paramount, doing some things over there. Brother I went to school with, NYU. Shout out to them, even though they were part of my pain and trauma too. But
everything has its place.
There you go. If not for them, I would not be here now. But dope shit. Across the Spider-Verse.
Yes. 100%. 100%.
Across the Spider-Verse is some of the best work that I've seen in film in the last couple years. And I give it a 12 out of 10, number one. Number two, I feel like this is going to be, that film is going to be this generation's Akira. Or, as some of those folks who know how to pronounce it, Akira. It's going to be this generation's version of that. It is they do so many amazing things with animation to communicate beyond just the physical world, but to communicate ideas, feelings, and thoughts, distortion of time and location. It was masterful. The pop culture references, the character development, the storytelling, the plot twists were just like, when you get so enwrapped in something that you don't see what's obviously coming because you're so deep in it, and then when it happens, you're like,
Storytelling.
damn, how did I not see that coming? They did it so well. And at some point, I'm looking at this film, and I'm noting how long it's going on. I'm like, man, are they going to do that thing that movies do where they spend so much time on exposition and character development, and they only got 10 minutes to wrap it up, and then they sort of hurry up and tie up all these loose ends. And then they didn't do that, and I was like, oh, okay. And when I was in the theater, I went to see a 4DX, and when we got to this moment in the film, I don't want to give it away. There was a collective gasp in the entire theater, followed by "What the fuck?" and I said, "Now that is storytelling, when you are so deeply immersed in it that you just forget time and space." And that was a 2-hour and 20-minute film that felt like it was about an hour and 10 minutes. And I was just like, it felt like it was half the time. So I have to say, for all of the reasons mentioned, and probably some of the Easter eggs that I did not see, and now I need to go look up the whole Easter egg thing of it, I give it a 12 out of 10. It's the best film, the best movie going experience that I've had in the last 5-6 years.
Dope. I'm literally pulling up to buy my ticket right now. I completely forgot about that. I need to get that.
So I haven't seen it, but I want you to know that I've heard nothing but consistent reviews. My intern actually, I have her do a version of Dope Shit Ain't Shit, but appropriately titled for the workplace. And she did a whole basic dissertation on the film, pointing out everything you pointed out, from the cultural references that were on point to the time and space to acknowledgement of culture. So I'm excited to see it. And now you got folks spending their money quicker than they probably wanted to go see it right now. So thank you.
Hey, I'm just saying, I ain't gonna steer you wrong. I might not tell you what's right, but I ain't gonna tell you what's wrong.
I know that's right. Can I get an amen, somebody? But speaking about amen and somebodies and people and steering us wrong and right, but mostly right, Eternal Polk, I want to talk about you. We brought you to the show to hear more about your creativity and what you're bringing to the table. For those of you that are probably looking at this on TikTok, you can see the dope ass visuals in the background. So we already can see visually that you know what it is when it comes to creativity. But I'd love to get a sense from you and from Simeon, how did y'all get together, and what are we going to talk about today? Let's jump into that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Rick from Branded Storytelling connected us because Eternal worked on this amazing film that's starting to rack up a lot of awards called Gaining Ground, The Fight for Black Land. And I'll let you dive a little bit deeper into it. But when he started talking about it, this film deals with Hare's property. It made me think about what's been happening in Brooklyn and Black communities around the country, where Black families who don't have wills in place, who don't have lawyers and et cetera, are losing their lands due to this loophole. And so I thought it'd be dope to talk about this on the podcast, because I think it'll be educating people, especially a lot of our listeners, but then also from the standpoint of this being a brand produced film and talking about what that process is like for people within advertising who are looking to do longer form content. But I'll throw it over to you, Eternal, to dive a little bit deeper into what Gaining Ground, The Fight for Black Land is about.
Well, essentially it's about a very common issue that's not widely known. And I was so surprised to hear about this thing called heirs property and how it was being used to take upwards of, I want to say 14 to 16 million acres of land from Black folks. And it's just agricultural land. This is not the coastland when we're talking about like Bruce's Beach in California, or the the coastline of the Carolinas and such. This is just agricultural land. And we've lost about 14 to 16 million acres of land through this little thing called heirs property. So the film covers the how we got here, what was, how did we get this much land to begin with? What were the situations and conditions? And then some of the issues that have, or some of the tactics that are being used to take land from Black folks, because this certainly isn't the only one. This is just the most, I feel like it's all of them are egregious, but this one is particularly so because it really does prey on the ignorance or the lack of resources that we have in our community to take a vast resource that has generational effect. And then finally, at the end of the film, we do provide solutions and information so people can preserve their land and preserve what I call the legacy of their family.
I mean, I know you mentioned the millions of acres that have been taken, but to contextualize it, on the website, it talks about the few decades after the end of enslavement, Black Americans were able to amass millions of acres of land, but since then, 90% of that land is no longer in Black hands, which is a wild ass number, right? So we talk about generational wealth, we talk about, economic mobility, especially within industries like ours, and to see that number that we only have like 10% of what we amassed after the years of slavery, that shit is wild. Like there's really no other way to say it, but the shit is wild.
Well, the craziest thing is that when I thought about it, I said, if I gave you a set of numbers and told you, like, what was that show where you would have to mix up the thing? Oh no, it's like Soul Train. Remember when you had to figure out what they were saying on the Soul Train board? So
Absolutely.
if I gave you these figures and I said, well, pick which column they would belong into, 1910 or 2010. I'm pretty sure if I told you that we had 20 million acres of land, you would be like, oh, 2010, easily. Not 1910, like 50 years outside of slavery, but it's not the case. And if I told you that when did we have 1 million farmers and when did we have 14,000 farmers, you probably would say, oh, we got way more farmers now because, you got access to capital, land, equipment, all the other stuff. But we actually had way more, but like within 50 years of the end of slavery. And honestly, we had a lot of land right in the 5 to 10 year period right after slavery ended. We had gotten a lot of land because the free labor made it that was no longer there, made it impossible for these landowners who were also slave owners to maintain that property and maintain the taxes. And so they could not care for the property. So they had to, in some instances, give it up, or they would make these little shady deals called sharecropping, where they would have the Black folks or tenant farm leasing, where they would have Black folks working the land, paying them like small amounts of money, and then they would eventually get the land, or they just outright were not able to take care of it themselves and they were able to get it. One of the people in our film, the Haney family, they got their first parcel of land in 1867. So we know 1865 is when the emancipation was. 1867 was when Juneteenth was. So in that time frame, they had already gotten a parcel of land, which they maintained in their family 5 generations later. And I met a number of 5 generation and 4 generation farmers and landowners through the course of this. So the numbers are wild, but when you talk about the land at 20 million acres and you talk about the farmers at 1 million, the number that really kind of pops is that 326 billion, which was what was lost. Conservative estimate, 326 billion. And that's not counting the coastal regions or urban situations where you lose homes, or as in Katrina, where you lose a home. It doesn't count that. It just counts agricultural land. So that's 326 billion right there. We're not talking about eminent domain,
Wow.
stuff like that. So when you look at 326 billion, you say, hey man, look, if we just took 326 billion and divided amongst, us as Black folks in America, that's a nice little number. Nice little number.
It's not only a nice little number, but it represents the it represents the amount of wealth that has actually been held away from us, back from us, that has actually been hidden from people. It's interesting that we have you on the show and we're having this conversation a month after Juneteenth and a week or two, I don't know what day it is at this point, but a week or two after July 4th, because the question in my head becomes, what's more American than taking land, if you will, and coveting it for yourself? Because that is, when we talk about our white communities and how they amassed wealth and how they, things that you don't have to worry about. A house, it's easier to get a house, it's easier to have land, and they pass these things down. And the conversations, particularly as we talk about affirmative action and giving people access to education and just access to wealth, we talk about this thing as though, like, just go and get it. Like, you can just go and get it. But a lot of people can't, particularly Native African Americans in the United States, who there is no foundation, there is no reserve of wealth, or very little wealth in a reserve, because there were proactive, very deliberate schemes, scams, and fuckery that was done to hijack what could have built a higher class in America of Black peoples. And I would extend that out to those of us that are even first generation American, because as our families come to the United States, we are kind of bucketed into the treatment and the trials and tribulations of those folks who really don't have. And so, as I think about this topic is so interesting to me. With Apple's, Killers of the Flower Moon is out on Apple TV right now, talking about a similar situation. How did you become interested in this topic, and what kind of motivated you to bring it to life in this film?
Well, honestly, the film itself came to me, but the idea of and my interest in farmers and us getting back to the land was sort of a convergence of a few different things. One, being in New York for 27 years, I was getting tired of the the trash, the rats, the traffic, the people, the buildings. I was getting tired of all anything New York. It was like a bad relationship where anything you do is on my is working my nerves. So New York was working my nerves, and becoming the omnipresent trigger in my life. Every time I turn around, I was just like upset. And also, then that sort of was started to plant the idea, pun intended, of getting back to spaces and land and all this other stuff. And I'm gonna just nerd out a little bit. I've always been like a Lord of the Rings fan, so every time I was in the woods, I would always imagine that I was in one of those books. And so this was sort of my retreat from reality, going into the woods and things of that nature, and in mountains. And so it was sort of, that was growing in me more and more. And especially as you kind of get outside of New York City and go into like upstate. For us is like a past Westchester. But when you get out of New York and you start like, oh wow, there is like land and there's peace and there's quiet. And so the pandemic comes, and then everyone starts like, hey, we got to get out of the city. And I had, during the pandemic, I was on a thread of Black men, and a couple of them had farmland, and they had mentioned that they had hundreds of acres of farmland that was in their family since like the late 1800s. which kind of blew my mind because I was like, wait a minute, the late 1800s, like we had land like that. Because I'm like, well, slavery just ended. How we, my mind was sort of like, we're trying to get out the South. We're trying to, do all this other stuff. We're not over here amassing farmland. And that little, and a couple hundred acres is not even much compared to what people were holding, like 2,000 acres and 4,000 acres in some instances back then. And when I was at this, I was doing a lot of work with this marketing company that was working a lot with BET. And when the George Floyd economy started, all of them were like, "Oh, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? What can we do?" And I was like, "Promote Black farmers, mentor Black farmers." And I wasn't just like, "Hey, let's give them money." I was like, "Look, let's partner this farm with like a restaurant chain, like Burger King, McDonald's, something, and you kind of mentor them from the field to the table, like supply chain, distribution, how to get your produce into these places." So I was like thinking along sustainable things that have long lasting impact, and not just say, hey, and even though some farmers need a check more than they need anything advice, um I wanted to create these long lasting things. Needless to say, that did not happen, but my mind was set on how I could promote Black farmers. And then a former colleague of mine from NFL Films, who's now working at Al Roker Entertainment, reached out to me about another project and told me about this project. And so here's where we get the power of manifestation. Every time we got on the phone, I kept saying to her, I would love to direct that project. It's such a great project to direct. I would love to direct it. And he had another director in mind. And every time we spoke, I brought this up. How's it going? Did you get it locked in? I would love to direct. And then a couple of months later, I get a phone call at like 9 in the morning. I literally was asleep. She said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm asleep. What's up?" She's like, "I got some work for you. Get up." And I said, "Okay, cool." She said, "Remember that farming documentary?" And I'm like, yeah. She says, "How would you like to direct that?" And I'm like, "The one that I kept bringing up to you every time we spoke?" "Yes." "Okay, you got an hour." We pitched, we meet the client. The client needs to meet the director. And so an hour later, I was on a call with the team from John Deere and the team from Al Roker, and I was pitching to them what I thought the story was, and that's how it came together. It really came to me, but I was so passionate about this idea of us getting back to the land, and us highlighting Black farmers and farming as an option or a road for us economically, and just having land, in our family. I was so passionate about that. I feel like I kind of called it to me. So that's how it happened. It was like it was not of my own doing, but I had a part in it.
I think that's dope too, because going back to your manifesting point, it kind of sounds like it started from the group thread that you had with the Black men, where you started getting interested in them having farmland. So to get from there to actually like directing this film about preserving the farmland amongst Black communities feels like that's where like the nugget started, and then it bloomed into what we have in front of us right now.
And also, when we were talking, like during during the protest, the conversation was about generational wealth. The conversation was about us having power, and a lot of our laws in this land are centered around land ownership, and so at one point, having land was the way you could vote. So. So us getting back to that from that perspective was like clear and present conversation. Like, I know we were talking about a lot of other things, but I thought something that was more sustainable and had a lot of room for us in terms of how we could use and leverage it was actually owning land. And the pandemic taught us you need to learn how to grow stuff and cook stuff and fend for yourself, because when those supply chains get interrupted, how you gonna get your food if the bodega is closed and they don't have food? Like, and there were plenty of people that were like, yo, I'm going to learn how to grow stuff. And I think it was just, the puns are just, all around, but the ground was fertile for for this kind of thing to really be the topic of conversation. And I was surprised, honestly, I was surprised that it wasn't. I was surprised that of all the things that we could talk about, that land wasn't one of them. And now, considering all the different things that we've talked about previously, I can see why land wasn't one of those things, because you don't want to get people thinking a revolutionary act is to purchase 10 acres of land. And you don't want to get them thinking that, hey, if they don't want to live in the city anymore and pay these exorbitant rents and basically deplete all of their income, that you might want to think about getting some land, and you can grow an acre of land. An acre of garlic can yield you $40,000. Like 1 acre, $40,000.
Wow.
You don't want to get people thinking like that. And I hate to get on my old black man conspiratorial tip, but the fact that when we were pushing all these solutions and none of them were like, okay, we need to get land and we need to start getting together and buy land. And there were some groups that were doing that. But overall, that wasn't the conversation. It was about more access to, the structures that were already there.
Yeah.
It's surprising that this wasn't on more people's minds and more people's conversation to actually implement purchasing, growing, and being sustainable for ourselves.
And I think that the sad part about it, but what I love about you and the team of production of filmmaking contributors doing with this film, is really putting Black folks in the light of ownership. And I think that that's what's missing from the narrative. That's why at the start of the pandemic, there were conversations about food deserts and insecurities and, having land. Like, if we look at what a lot of people did during the pandemic, self-included, we left the confines of, urban development to go out and find a place for fresh air, find a space where you can grow vegetation, whether that's for aesthetics or for sustenance. And so I love that you're putting this on Front Street. I love that you're amplifying these challenges, because in this country, being an owner is what is coveted, but we don't necessarily look at Black folks as already having an induction into that space since the Reconstruction era. We gained a lot of rights and a lot of land and a lot of wealth during that time. And quite similarly to what we are seeing today, as Simeon would say, slowly but surely, we see some of these regressions in advances taking place that we had gained after a lot of that was lost during Reconstruction.
So you know what, and that's really key with what you're saying about what's happening right now. How much we gained and lost. And then if you think about things like abortion rights and affirmative action, a lot of us are thinking like, thought that was some old shit. We're trying to get the new shit now. We didn't think that those would be things that we would be talking about again. But now it's like going right back to zero to battle the things that have already been fought. And when you look at land ownership, and when you look at just ownership, man, when I was doing the research, you know what bugged me out? I was looking at this old footage from the Library of Congress. There was a brother who he was a pastor, and somehow he got hold of a camera, like a film camera, and he was filming everyday life, everyday Black life. One of the people, first of all them people were clean as the Board of Health. It was so many people that was just like clean, dressed, like, whatever. But there was one guy that had 2 oil wells. And I was just like, wait a minute, hold on. This is when the camera first started. This is back in Birth of a Nation camera. This was that camera. And I'm seeing Black folks owning oil wells in the early 1900s. And I'm like, first of all, just our sort of like, resilience to, come through this era of slavery and then be like, oh, I need a real ass break. We collectively, generationally, we need a break. They were like, no, we get into business. And to have multiple oil wells, you couldn't have told me that like right off the bat that's what's happening. And I would have to Google it, as they say, let me Google verify this. But it just goes to show how much we don't know about what we've actually accomplished and done. And also how much we don't know about what has been done to us.
Mhm.
And I'll give you, so when you take away some oil fields, that's one thing. You take away, economic ability and mobility, and money makes money. So you take money away, then you take away a person's ability to make more money. But then, that's one aspect of it. But one of the towns that we went to film in, you do a basic search on the town, you found out there was a massacre of 200 Black folks centered around voting rights. What are we fighting for right now? Voting rights in all of these states. So you talk about a woman's right to choose, affirmative action, voting rights. This is all stuff that was 100 years ago almost that we were dealing with. And now we're dealing with that same thing. So this story is just basically the I guess the full circle coming back to the stuff that we were dealing with before, fighting for our humanity and our autonomy and our agency.
I want to shift a little bit because we start off talking about the George Floyd economy, and there were a lot of brands that made these grand gestures during that time. And I ain't gonna lie, like when I hear John Deere, I think conservative. I think very much like not down for progression or social progression. But they are the leaders for this film. So like, how did that come to be? Like, why are they the ones that are pushing for this film? Like, what are their receipts? Because I think that was a big part of like the George Floyd economy, where we saw brands making gestures, but they didn't have the receipts to back it up. So the things that they were doing weren't sustainable. So how are they involved in this film?
Well, it's crazy because I felt the same way. I was like, John Deere, like, first of all, I didn't think any Black people worked there. I'm just being honest. And when I got on the call, it was black. It was a Black woman. It was two Black women and one Latina. And you know how that could be. We're gonna bring our Black folks and put them on the call or whatever. But they started this program called the Leap Coalition. And the Leap Coalition was a coalition of organizations that were already doing the work to help people with heirs property. So it was Thurgood Marshall College Fund, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and the National Black Growers Council. So the idea was that we need to help these people, but we need to support the people who are already doing the work. Now, where did the impetus for this come from? Within the halls of John Deere. This is why representation is important. There's a brother, he was the number 3 guy, chief administrative officer there. Almost every person of color that's in John Deere now, you can almost trace back to him being hired and him having a focus and emphasis in bringing a diversity into their workforce. John Deere itself has been, noted to be an abolitionist, like the founder of the company. And their brand storytelling thing they did years ago, they started this thing called the Furrow, which was basically the stories of farmers. So they were kind of in the storytelling world already. There's this through line of abolition in the owners, who the founder of the company. And then you have this person, Mark House, who who had heirs property in his own family.
Hmm.
And when they were trying to figure it out, like, okay, what do we do? What is our response? It was like, we're not just going to give money to the NAACP and then wash our hands and walk away. And it was because of his leadership and vision. He was like, no, we're going to make something sustainable that has economic impact. And where can we fit into that space that is in alignment with what we do? And they are in the farming and agricultural space. And heirs property was the biggest issue affecting Black landowners. And so they just said, we're going to pull these groups of people together, these organizations together to tackle this. And so that's how they came to it. It was very much so they had someone in the organization who was sensitive to the issue because it was in his family. And also it just happened to be the issue that was the biggest plague in terms of Black land ownership and retaining land ownership in America. And actually anywhere there are Black people who have land. So this is not just an American problem. It's a South American problem. It's an African problem. It's anywhere Black folks have land, you're going to have this issue of their land being taken away from them.
Yo. All right. So you've been racking up awards over the last couple of weeks. You were down at Essence Fest a couple of weeks ago. You won an award. You won, I think the other one was the Film Teeth Award.
Yes, yes.
Where are you showing up next with this film? Where else is it screening?
Well, we're going to be screening next, and I can't wait, is the Black Star Film Festival in Philadelphia. And, I hope they're listening, or the people who are listening, because I'm just going to say it, out of all of the festivals that we have been dealing with, they are the tightest. They run a tight ship. They got everything on point. They communicate. They're producing like the materials that you need to promote yourself for being in their festival. Like they have everything on point, and I can't wait to go to their festival. But I have a string of them back to back. So the 4th, I'll be in Philly at the Black Star Film Festival.
August 4th, right?
August 4th, the Black Star Film Festival in Philly. August 5th, the Indianapolis Black Documentary Film Festival. And that is because Indianapolis is my hometown, and I had to bring this to where I'm from. And then we go to Martha's Vineyard August 6th. So the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th, I'll be going from one festival to another. And then hanging out at the Martha's Vineyard, Lord have mercy, Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. I'll be hanging out there for a couple of days. Yes, so that's what's going on with the film over the next, and we're waiting to hear from some other festivals. We got some things in the works, some ones that'll be really big. And I'll just say the ABFF was a great festival, and I believe it's iconic. I remember when that festival was starting. It was the Acapulco Black Film Festival, and I always wanted to do that. And the Essence Festival, iconic, a part of that. And I'll just say, and Martha's Vineyard is iconic. And there's a couple of other iconic situations that I'm waiting to see if they come to fruition. and then the people in New York will be able to check it out. But I'm gonna have to come back for that one.
Yo, brother man, we appreciate you for stopping by, talking about this film. Where can the people find you? Because you do work in advertising. You are a director.
I'm about to say, first and foremost, the supplier diversity economy does not stop. And so with that, how do folks hire you? How do they get to know you? How do they loop you in for engagement with our brands?
Now, see, that's why we need to have a whole podcast episode on that part. Because listen, I'm just going to be real brief. But I'm going to say this, that we're still Black folks in this business, and we know how this business does is we can do excellent work. We can do amazing work, and people on the outside will see the pictures and the festival and all this other stuff, and they're like, yo, he's busy. I am not. And there's a reason for that, we don't have to get into it, but I'll definitely get into it. But you can reach me at Eternal Polk on all platforms, and that's POLK, not POKE. Ain't nobody with the last name Polk, POKE out here. But Eternal Polk .com, Instagram Eternal Polk, LinkedIn Eternal Polk, Twitter Eternal Polk, on all on all socials. I'm Eternal Polk. And I am available for work. We're always available for work. Well, I don't know we're always available for work.
The bag is always ready to be gotten.
Stop the games. Stop the games. And let's do what others won't. I'll put it that way. Let us do what others won't.
Word.
Saying the unsaid. Love it.
Y'all know where to find us. We are on all the platforms as Axmix Company. Reach out, questions, suggestions, all that good shit.
And thank you for joining us. Y'all take care.
This was dope. This was so fast. We got to do it again.